Hello everyone. So in this video, I'm going to go through some mistakes that's extremely rare for the best pro players to make. If you're an avid viewer of the comp scene, you'll learn a bit about some of the philosophies the best coach in the game has. And if you're someone who just plays Apex, you can learn some very helpful tips that you can apply to your own games. So like I said, a big part of this video comes from the take that TSM's very own coach Raven said, which I'll explain and give my opinion on a bit. Without further ado, the first mistake that the best pros rarely make is not being able to find the balance between being proactive versus being reactive. Raven preaches this point often on his own stream about just not letting things happen to you, but rather oftentimes you have to create the opportunities yourself that can allow you to win the game or place well. It's important to know that there's a balance though, as a team being proactive versus reactive entirely depends on the situation and what the highest odds play is for points. Remember that I said highest odds for points, not winning specifically, as that'll come up later. So when talking about being proactive versus reactive, there's a lot of things that you can hear or maybe not hear that are considered by elite teams. Viewers will often hear pro players talk about clearing their back. So that's a proactive call, saying that they don't want to have any surprises when the zone closes and they want to have that side of the zone to themselves. So they'll go kill the teams behind them. So like I said, they'll have that part of the zone to themselves. Something that you won't hear people say, but they definitely think about is, if I sit here and do nothing, what's going to happen to me? So basically you consider the different scenarios of what would happen to your team if you just don't do anything. So let's say you're end game and you're sitting in a building, you're thinking about, okay, if I just sit here and don't take a fight, what's the highest amount of points that I could get doing this that's actually likely? In some scenarios, yeah, that's the right play to just sit there and do nothing. But in other scenarios, it's important to take fights and create engagements so that you can carve out certain spots of the zone for yourself, or so you can just give yourself a better chance at succeeding. Another thing the best pro players consider when they're playing is thinking about their threats. They think, who are my threats? Do I need to eliminate that threat myself, or will they die to another team? So they're sitting there thinking, what is the chance that this team can mess up my game? If it's high, then you have to do something about it, obviously, because again, you have to be proactive in that situation. You can't just let things happen to you. The portion about that where I say, or will that threat die to another team? It's basically like, can that threat actually harm me without being harmed themselves? Meaning like, can this team really just run out in the open and run at me without getting lobby focused? Or can this team really start a fight with me knowing 100% that they're going to get third partied? Things like that are considered to know if they're really a threat or if they're just a team near you. Just because a team is near you or just because you can see a team doesn't mean that they're actually a threat to your game. Something else pro players should be considering is, what's the highest percent play I can make to get points? Going back to my point I made earlier, it's not always about winning, because in some scenarios you just can't win the game. If you're a viewer of the comp scene, you'll often hear teams say things like play for second. That doesn't mean that they don't know what they're doing. It's probably the opposite. In a lot of scenarios, you just straight up cannot win that game. So it's better to play for kills so that you can maximize your potential points. So how exactly can you apply all of this to your own games? Well, I have 2 points for you guys. Number one, remember to look at the teams around you and think about who are genuine threats. You also need to remember to think about, if I sit here and do nothing, what's going to happen? So you have to be considering best/worst case scenarios, what's realistically the best you can do by just sitting there. It's not always a bad thing to just go AFK in a game pretty much and just collect points, but oftentimes it's important to know that you can't just sit there and let things happen to you, because you just won't be successful. The second huge mistake that the best pro players rarely make is taking too long to fight. Pros make sure to be aware of their surroundings whenever taking an engagement in order to give themselves the lowest odds of being third party. What you can take away from this is pretty linear across pro players and just casuals. So when you're contesting, be aware of who/how many teams are landing around you, so you'll know if a third party is likely to come. It's important to keep a mental clock of the engagement so you can consider how far away that third party could be. When you're taking a mid-game engagement, it's extremely helpful to know what teams are around you and what situations they're in to see if they're even capable of third partying your fight. And if they are capable, then you need to keep a mental note of how long it would take for them to show up. I'm talking about them being capable because just because a team is near you doesn't mean that they can third party your fight. It depends on the zone / where that team is in the zone. You also have to consider, could that team realistically run across in the open to fight you? And also, is that team even fighting themselves? Because if they are, maybe you can get away with a quick fight. So anyway, if you notice the fight is taking too long, there's really only 3 plays that you can make. Disengage and leave with less loot than you started with, but at least you're alive. Keep playing it how you are and potentially / likely get third partied. Full send into the fight and potentially die from overextending. Win the fight and get third partied anyway, or get very lucky and don't get thirded. See how none of these options really sound all that great? Because realistically, there's rarely a benefit to fighting for too long. Even if you do end up winning the fight and don't get thirded, it's likely to have made your next rotations much harder to manage. This point about rotations is much more relevant to pro play and ALGS rather than casuals and ranked, because if you're in an ALGS lobby and your fight takes too long, your rotation will be absolutely screwed and it'll be much more difficult to get into the zone and find a spot. Before I get to the third and final mistake, 99% of you guys who watch my videos aren't subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, like the video and hit that subscribe button for more ALGS and pro play content. Anyway, the last huge mistake that the best pros rarely make relates to comms. It's kind of like a 3-for-1, giving 0 comms, giving unhelpful comms, or not communicating important information. In every single competitive team game that has ever and will ever exist, whether it's a real life sport or a video game, communication is key. Think about it this way. Which team do you think will be more successful? The one operating like a hive mind, where it feels like everyone is on the same page and feels like they can see the game from their teammates' perspective, or the team that has 3 individual minds thinking completely different things all at the same time? The answer is pretty obvious. Information is key. The more you know about what's going on in game, the better you can handle situations as an individual and as a team. I feel like that's kind of obvious, but what may not be obvious though is that not everything needs to be communicated. Overloading your teammates with information that won't actually do anything can just be frustrating and or can cause confusion. And pro players rarely make this mistake. For example, if you're sitting in a building with a 30-30 and hit someone 300 meters away for 40, you don't have to say that. Calling out damage like that is just unnecessary, considering it doesn't matter at all, and it may actually cause your teammates to lose their train of thought about something important. Or let's say you actually get in a fight and you're knocked. Screaming, crying, and complaining just doesn't do anything. Either shut up, or better yet, communicate important information to your teammates, saying things like, you can use my knock, I cracked him, he's behind this box, he's popping a bat, they're rezzing. Pinging things in Apex when you're knocked is a very valuable thing that you can do, because you can give your teammates information that they can honestly just not see. Again, just because you shouldn't say some things doesn't mean that most information is unvaluable. And that's another point from this issue within comms. Pro players will rarely not communicate important information. It's extremely helpful in every situation that your teammates know what you know and that you're all on the same page. Here's some examples of comms that pro players are insistent on making that regular players often just don't. Saying things like, I don't / I won't have my ult for this, you're alone right now, I'm healing, give me 5 seconds. They will also often call out what characters a team has, point out when / if they saw an enemy use their ultimate so that your team knows that the enemy won't have it, communicating their inventory status, and much, much more. There are so many things that you can take away from this video relating to communication, fighting strategies, and overall philosophies on the game. Hopefully you guys learned how you can apply some of these things to your own games, but also hopefully you learned a bit more about pro play and some of the differences between pro players and casual players. If you like this video, drop a like, and if you want to see more from me about ALGS and pro play, subscribe to the channel. Let me know what videos you guys might want to see next, and yeah, see you later.